Good afternoon, good evening, or morning, wherever you are on this beautiful planet. This is Rebecca Jernigan coming to you live from the heart of America to around the globe via the World Wide Web, journeying into the realms of the known and the unknown. You're listening and watching Journeys with Rebecca on Project Camelot TV Network. Welcome, everybody. Well, today is really going to be a fun and casual show, and I'm glad to be back. It's been a while since I've been on, as far as on PCTV network, and it's really good to have everyone here, and it's good to be back. And today I've got my guest and producer with me today, Brian Onley, and we're going to be talking about some various topics. We're going to just kind of let this thing take a life of its own, so to speak. But we're going to be talking about the construct and a lot more today. And I've got a couple of quick announcements that I want to make before we actually get too far into this today. If you guys will log on to my website, that's journeyswithrebecca.com, I've added the new links to both of the books, the Tarot, the Intuitive Approach with the Audio Companions, and all the information is there that you might need for that, as well as my latest release, The Great Revealing. And this is book one that will end up being a trilogy. So that is also available on the website. That's journeyswithrebecca.com. And I would like to let people know that if they follow me on my Twitter account, that's the best way to get the quickest updates and the last minute updates, as well as signing up for the newsletter. The newsletter is always there at the front page of my website, where you can sign up, and it's confidential, free of charge, and I usually send those out once a week in order to get all the detailed information, and any updates and news will come out once a week in that newsletter. You can see the calendar of all the guest schedules and all the events and classes as well. So with that being said, let's see if our Brian is still there. His screen is doing something kind of strange, so I'm not quite sure if he's still with us or not. Brian, are you there? I think we have lost Brian for the moment. He will be rejoining us, I'm sure, as soon as he can. He does have his mic muted as well. Yep, we did. We lost Brian for a moment. He'll be back. That being said, today will be a really fun show. And if you guys have questions in the chat box, if you will put all of your questions in all caps, we'll get to those and answer those as quickly as we possibly can during the show. If you have questions, please do make sure you write those in the chat box, and we'll go and retrieve them and then answer them right on air. I do have a full lineup coming up in December for guests. We're going to try to get Marie D. Jones back for Mind Wars. She's been scheduled twice, and due to some very odd circumstances, it hasn't been able to happen. So we're hoping to get her back at the end of the month. Tomorrow my show is Harvey Kraft, and it's called The Buddha in Babylon. And now that's going to be a real fun show, because it's not what you think it is. It's going to be a journey into consciousness and his own exploration into the Buddha. So you will definitely want to tune in tomorrow night from 7 to 9 p.m. That's the live show right here. There's a live link as well posted on my website that you can get to. Let's see. I have wow, I've even got January partially scheduled. I have several other people scheduled for this month, and of course the name eludes me right now. Let's see if I can find that, because my producer hasn't actually shown back up yet. So I'm not sure if he's having internet issues or what, but it does appear that I'm in here. So let me see what else we can find here that I have. Oh, yes. I have Bob Mitchell coming on. What if the world we live in really isn't what we think it is or believe it is? That is really going to be an excellent show. That comes out on the 16th. I also have Dr. Barbara Mango and Dr. Bob Davis coming on next Wednesday. Now, they are going to be talking about near-death experiences, consciousness. I know you guys are going to definitely want to tune in next Wednesday night for that, because of the fact that we're going to be talking about near-death experiences and dreams and et cetera and so forth. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of questions that will also be able to be answered on the air with these two people. Now, for those of you that don't remember, Bob Davis was on early in September, one of my first guests when we took PCTV live. So he will be joining Barbara, Barbara's thesis, in order for her to get what she needed, was all about near-death experiences, experiencers, abduction, et cetera, and so forth. So this conversation next week is really going to go into quite a fair amount of topics, and we're going to have really, really lively discussions. I've been pretty fortunate to be able to have Bob and Barbara talk, and we've all kind of talked in the past here off air, and Barbara is just so full of energy. I know you're just really going to love her. So that being said, I also want to bring up that I do Mondays on wolfspirit.tv, and I'm in there with JP. For those of you who might remember JP, we have been doing a series on the construct. Now, the construct is something that I brought out in my original radio show, Journeys with Rebecca, back in the late, well, right around 2008, 2009. I started talking about the construct. Some people refer to it as the matrix. My guides call it the construct. And through the years have been given a ton of information about the construct, what it is and what it is not. And Simon Parks recently, last year, I think it was, no, I'm sorry, it was this year, I think it was in August or September, has shared some information about what he calls the matrix and it being engineered, it being created. It's a technology, and he's absolutely right with that, because that's what the construct really is. It's really about a technology that was created eons and eons ago. And it does look like we now finally have our /guest producer back on the air, as I've been babbling away here over and over again. Welcome back, Brian.
Hey, hey.
Hey, it's good to have you. As I've been sitting here, like I'm telling everybody, just babbling away, talking about my guests and topics and all kinds of fun things.
Oh, good.
Yeah, so I was just getting into the construct and about the shows that I was doing on Monday, and which was going to lead me to the next thing I was going to talk about, which was you and I spoke, and you said you had been watching those shows on the construct, and I know you have certainly some information, is maybe some questions, some 2 cents, whatever, to throw into the mix. I'd love to hear from you. I'm sure so would the audience.
Well, yeah, I watched the shows with JP, and fascinating stuff. Absolutely fascinating. I mean, we've been led towards that whole matrix concept now for several years, and it just seems to me that just from your discussion points about the construct, it makes more sense that way than it does just by the, I guess, the viewpoint of the Wachowski brothers. Though the matrix itself is an interesting point, and I literally had to have it explained to me through several of their interviews what they were intending to do with the matrix. And it made sense to me after hearing all of that. I mean, otherwise it was just a great science fiction story. But as I picked up more and more information behind what the Matrix was actually about, then to hear your discussions about your new book, The Construct, it's the next step in the evolution of what that's about, at least from what I've been hearing.
Well, thank you for that, Brian. And for the purposes of the conversation today, I want to draw everyone's attention back to the first show that I did, which was talking about, I shared this many times on my radio show in the past, about and I always call them my night experiences, because it is an experience. It's not a dream. I'm not dreaming. But it was called The Field of the Talking Heads. That's just exactly how it feels to me, is the Talking Heads. I think if you remember that, and what I was shown, and that all of us are connected to a source that led back into a laboratory of sorts. Okay, I mean, that's the closest term that I can get to it, because our language is so restrictive to what it is that I actually see and comprehend. I don't have any words to share because they don't fit exactly. They're not exactly the same thing, but it's as close as I can get. So in this laboratory, there is it's a control mechanism, basically, is what it is. And it is a mechanism. It's something that was put into place here, and it's been hijacked, and it's giving us a false sense of reality. It's also given us a false sense of society, a false sense of who we are. It's also obscured the real truth of who we are and where we come from. It's obscured even how we interact with each other, how we share and don't share with each other. It's an extremely interesting concept. I have to say, you know, the stuff that comes to me, it isn't because I necessarily ask for anything specific. It just shows up, and I'm given this stuff, and the only thing I know to do is to share it. Whether I agree with it, I understand it 100%, it is not relevant to me. It's this information has to get out regardless. Yeah. So the construct is really part of everything that we recognize as our reality, or we think is our reality. Much like the movie, The Matrix, where they go in and out of the upper world to the lower world, or the outer world, whatever you want to call it. And their world is very different than the one that has been built on the top, right? And I think because we had a kind of an off-air conversation here before we started today, it kind of gets into some other theories when you start pulling apart the movie itself, the Matrix movie. There's a lot of components to it. Lots and lots and lots and lots of components. Besides the Matrix itself being something that was constructed, much like the construct was built, it's a technology, so was the Matrix. But also we have to look at, where does he come from, the character? He was in a place where there was hundreds and thousands of them all hooked up to these machines, right? And they were having this dream state in which that was their reality. And then when they unplugged him, they literally took him off the machine. He recognized what reality is. And as he looked out, there was hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and millions of everybody in these little sarcophagus-like things with tubes in a physical form, having some kind of experience, right? Interacting with each other. Now, I want you to stop and think about that. How many movies have you seen that have same or similar memes to them? Where, whether it be a human or even an extraterrestrial, that they're all hooked up and they're in these pods, right? And they're all having these experiences.
Well, there's been a couple of, let's say, very minimal references to that type of thing. I believe there was a couple of television shows that touched on something lightly about that, about virtual reality. Basically, they could step into a pod that would take over their five senses, and they would experience some computer animation or computer simulation that would be so real that they literally, some people fell into it and couldn't get out of it. But there hasn't been anything quite to the length that the Matrix touched on, as far as connectivity and the perception of such a deep perception of what's going on or what's not going on.
Right. And The Matrix was, for anybody that hasn't seen it in a while, every once in a while on TV, yeah, every once in a while on TV, they will have the trilogy. They'll have all of them, and you could just sit down and just veg out on the Matrix movies. I really suggest everyone going back, and especially if it's been a few years, because what you will see is what you missed, and you'll see all the nuances that you might have missed from before. Same with any of them, though, right?
Right.
Do you remember the movie Tron?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, so there's another one where he jumped into a computer, a virtual world, and then
Right.
the Tron 2 movie goes into the future of that 50 years or whatever it was, for the son to rescue his father from this virtual world. And in this virtual world, it was another world that had been created. And when they pulled him back out, of course, then that world became the reality. So I guess the point is that what is reality? Reality is what you feel and experience, right? But there's more to it than that. When you step outside of the construct, I was talking about this yesterday, when you're stepping outside of the construct, what you're looking at is how it really is. And it's not what people think it is at all. This earth is not what people think it is. This earth has such a vibration to it and has such a unique energy signature all of its own that it's fascinating to step outside of it and to be able to come back into this reality. It can also be a little combobulating for many people.
Oh,
You have
yeah.
to kind of know what you're doing. Not everybody can do it. Not everybody should do it that can do it, right? Because it really depends on where your mindset is. But I think this gets into some of the other, the reason why I was bringing up the pods and all that is because you were talking about some of the things that you had been kind of researching, shall we say.
Yeah.
And it'd be interesting for you to chat a little bit about some of the things that you have kind of been looking into and what that may mean for people.
Well, there's aside from the references of the Matrix, which is it's a good one because it's foundational. Everybody should be aware of it. So that way, you have at least something you can draw from. But it seems like after the Matrix, it kind of quieted down in that topic line for quite some time. And only recently, I think I've started hearing tales or stories about some sort of an energy grid that surrounds the planet that restricts our being able to attach to universal consciousness. And that then evolves into what you've been putting forward as the construct, which would make perfect sense.
Yeah, now I want to reiterate, these are not my terms. This was the terms that I was given when these visions began for me years ago. They called it the construct. And as a matter of fact, it took me a while, because I'm a little bit of a dense matter on occasion. It took me a while to figure out that the construct was what some people were calling the Matrix. And for me, it was different enough that it didn't resemble it, and yet same enough that it did resemble it. So there was, this little quandary I had about what the Matrix is and isn't. And then I kind of figured out it's just the perception of what people have been shown through the movies and their own ideas and understandings of what the Matrix is. The construct is a little bit, it's way more involved from a different perspective. So yeah.
Well, I mean, even in the movie itself, there's a clear definition between the Matrix and the construct. I mean, the Matrix is what you perceive as the reality, but the construct is the foundational source of it. Everything is built upon the construct.
Yeah,
at least according to even their story.
That's true. That's true. Now, the difference is here is with the Earth plane, the construct was actually originally intended for altruistic purposes, but it was abandoned. It was actually meant as a kind of a shield, if you will. And this will go, by the way, this will go along with some of the other people, even though they're not connecting the dots yet. Idea of what happened is that this construct was here to kind of help assist in the growing of this planet, which means humanity, right?
Right.
So it was left to its own devices because it was supposed to be left to its own devices. We would either thrive or fail to survive. And then some wars started, and they brought it into this galaxy and then into this solar system and then onto this planet. That's when everything went upside down. That's when the whole thing went crazy stupid. And that's when those that did not have the same values and broke, by the way, these were universal laws. These were code of ethics, not what man made, right? Not what the human made, but
Right.
what was supposed to be for all races, that this was supposed to be a hands-off planet. Actually, the whole solar system was at one point. That's not what happened. And so one thing led to another, and then it got hijacked. This beautiful energy field that surrounded the Earth got hijacked by sheathing it on the outside, these energy fields, with things that were not appropriate. They were not positive. They were not helpful. They were not kind. They were not loving. They were not considerate. And there began what some people would call the idea of the Matrix, where the image that was projected was that from those that programmed it. And they program it with their thoughts. This is the way we want this to be, and this is the way these people will be, and this is how this species is going to be, because we are the ones that are technologically advanced. We were not left to our own devices. We were interfered with right from the beginning.
If I remember correctly, did you and JP not discuss the fact that the construct existed on other planets as well?
It did. It wasn't quite identical because each planet has its own unique energy signature, just like the solar system kind of sticks together, right? It's brought together by its own specific field of energy, right? And it holds it in place.
Right.
And each planet has its own energy that goes around the planet and holds it into place, and also supports it in some manner for whatever life was supposed to be there. Now, what is life? It doesn't necessarily mean that it walks on two legs. Okay.
Right, of course.
Yeah. So, I mean, some people would argue that point, by the way, which is the only reason why I said that the way I did. Yeah, so each of the planets had some form of an energetic field. Some of it wasn't meant to be supporting the life forms the way that it was here, because this was a unique idea, because the idea actually started on Mars and Venus and Neptune, believe it or not. Those were the three planets that were kind of training grounds for the creators. And I use that word plural, not singularly.
Well, then that goes on to question, and somebody in the audience actually asked this, and I have no answer for it. Since there are separate instances of the construct, of which we have one of them, then it goes to say, well, who exactly created the construct? Is there any trace records or any mention of who they might be?
Well, it gets into the story of creation. And unfortunately, I don't have names, but I can give you the information that was shared with me. It's the best I can do. And then in the beginning, when we call it the Big Bang, it's somewhat similar to the Big Bang theory that people have talked about, when all of everything was created, right? And everything that was created also created physical form, as well as invisible form, invisible energetics. All of that was created. Was it a technological thing? I don't know. It, to me, feels like it was a thought, and a thought created. And then once it was created, it came into being. And in that state of creation, there were 7 worlds that were created. This gets real heavy. I'm not going to go into it real heavy, because this is like a 10-day conversation.
Sure.
7 worlds were created. And when I say worlds, I don't mean planets. I'm talking about complete worlds that housed galaxies, universes, space, time, etc., and so forth. When you think of infinite, think beyond it. Conceptually, that's how big this is. So most of these worlds would not even connect with each other because of, first of all, for the vastness of them. Okay. But there's always going to be one that touches the sides of 2 others, right? If you got one in the center, it's going to touch or be close to one on either side of it, if you want to think in linear terms. So the world in which we're on is one that there were 7 overseers. So if you want to call this the ones next to the one that created all things, then so be it. And in these 7 beings on this one world, they all had the power of co-creation. Now, not to the extent of the creator itself, because it's now been lessened by 7 times 7 is 49. So less 49. Now we're getting into mathematics, which is not my expertise or forte or my ability to explain. I'm a picture girl, right?
Right.
Okay, so the 7 then got together and created 7 more worlds each for themselves and became overseers of their own 7 worlds. And on them, they created overseers for each of those worlds. So now you can see how big these numbers go. Infinite, infinite, infinite. However, the further down the ladder you go, the less power of creation you have because it's been diluted. It's been stepped on, right? So you lose the ability to create as you would as the first original co-creators, right? So in these 7 worlds, we live on one world. And in this world, there are many other worlds, which we're finding out there's universes and galaxies and everything else within that. So, I mean, God only knows where we're at in the pecking order. How many layers have we come down before we've reached to this point, right?
Well, at least 3rd density.
At least 3rd density. So where did, how long did that take? Who knows, right? Who knows? So, okay. So now repeat the question so I can segue into it.
Well, defining the clear explanation of what the construct is, whether it be mechanical or at a conscious level.
It's both.
It's both. Well,
it has to be both because the creators that created it had a thought.
All right.
So, and the thought was, we're going to create a system that supports. So energy, thoughts are energy, and energy is thoughts, right?
Right.
But then they also had technology that they used to assist them without having to babysit it. It's like you can go turn your washer on, right? And in 25 minutes or 35 minutes, it's going to go through its cycle and be done. You don't have to go in there and mess with it. You just turn it on and leave it. It's going to do its job. That's kind of what happens with the construct. They turned it on and then they left it because it was supposed to be left to its own devices. But then you get the wars that come in, and then you get these other extraterrestrials that are coming in, and they know that this construct, or whatever you wish to call it at this point, exists. And so they know that they can utilize this energy, but now they can take this energy and they can mask it. So they put a sheath over it. You can take a bowl of ice cream and you can put a ton of chocolate syrup on it. But when it all is said and done and you eat through the chocolate syrup, the ice cream is still going to be there.
Right.
Okay, but you're eating nothing but and only seeing the chocolate ice cream or the chocolate syrup, right?
Yep.
So that's the same thing with the construct. What we are experiencing from a conscious level is because we're constantly receiving and sending 1,000 million signals in any second. So whether we can see the energy that's coming in, the information that's coming in, it's still coming in, and we're still sending out signals. So when you're looking at that and the construct is sending out these signals that this is our reality and that there's only 4 walls and a floor and a ceiling in a house, then that's what you're going to believe, because that's what you are looking at. That's what the signals have been telling you all of your life, and you haven't questioned it. You haven't felt it.
It seems like I have heard recently, and I think it was particularly from Alex Collier, if I remember correctly, who said that someone has poked a hole in this.
Yes.
And this is what has enabled us to be able to start consciously becoming aware of things that we weren't aware of not too long ago.
Well, you also have to look at, that's true. And the other portion of this is that the construct, when it was built, when it was originally formed, was never meant to last, quote unquote, forever. They knew it wouldn't. It was only supposed to be a supporting mechanism, not a end-all to end-all permanent feature, if you will.
Controlling mechanism.
Yes, it was never meant to be a controlling mechanism to begin with. It was here to substantiate life and to assist in the growth of life on this planet, right? That didn't happen. Okay, so, but what's happened is that they knew that if they would just leave it, eventually that the evolution would happen and this planet would flourish on its own without any assistance from anybody, because there's many planets out there that do this every single day in different galaxies, in different solar systems, in different worlds, whatever you want to call it, right? So they don't necessarily need to be babysat. We didn't need to be babysat, but then again, the war started, it got hijacked. That's what happened, is they knew that the beings that came here understood this construct and worked diligently to try to mask this natural energy that was there and utilize it for the control as opposed to the sustaining of this planet. So it becomes that sheath, like a sword is in its sheath. The sword's in there, but you can't see it. All you can see is the sheath. That's what you see. That's what you visualize. And that's exactly what's happened. And it's programmable. So it can program anything it wants as a projection, as an energy field, as a feeling, as a thought. I mean, and this is not new. This is ancient, old stuff here we're looking at.
Well,
so, and it wears down. It wears down. There are parts of it that is wore down, Brian, and then there's holes that have been put in it. It's called the lifting of the veil. The veil is the sheathing of the construct.
Well, then does that go to say them, or would you say, in your opinion, that all of this talk over the last several, I don't know, maybe a decade or more, concerning the Black Knight satellite, which several people have pointed out is supposed to be so old they can't even date it, that it is a mechanism of the construct?
It is a product of a construct.
Okay.
It was, and by the way, there's more than one of those out there.
Yeah.
So it depends on which one you're looking at, depends on which one it was supposed to be shooting information at, right?
Right.
Okay. So it's a product of the construct. It's the babysitter, right? And you can uplink to it and you can program it, which is getting back to the idea of the laboratory.
Yeah. Well, that makes perfect sense. I mean, if there's a controlling mechanism, so to speak, then there has to be, I mean, from our ridiculous third density logic, there has to be a controller.
Yes.
And this controller has to be somewhere. And so further up the chain, so to speak, that would almost just by inference define our pyramidal hierarchy structure of compartmentalization because it operates in almost the reverse manner.
Exactly. Exactly. Ta-dum.
Ta-da!
Ta-dum.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. The the field of the talking heads, that's a good visualization. You might want to go over that for the listeners a little bit. I couldn't explain it myself. I mean, I get it, but you did a
Well,
much better job
again,
explaining
it's
it.
so abstract. I mean, all this stuff is so abstract, and I'm not an abstract person. I really am not, you know? So when this stuff comes to me, I have to really stop and think about it and metaphorically figure it out and conceptually try to understand it. But the vision basically started where I was taken to a field. It was outside. It was the earth plane. And I was shown a field with these poles, just far as the eye could see, these poles with heads on it. That's all there were, which is heads. Now, these heads looked a little bit Toltec and something else. I mean, the very square face, almost like the Easter Island Moai, I think they call them.
Yeah.
But sorta. But they're all individualistic. They weren't identical in their looks. They were all slightly altered. So I had to only think that whoever made these or created these were taking them from maybe a memory or an indication of like a portrait of somebody, right? What we would consider like a portrait. So these, and they're all sitting there with a helmet-like thing structure on them. They almost look cement. They're very gray, but you could tell that they weren't hard like rock or cement. And their eyes were closed. Nobody had eyes open. They were all closed. And of course, I looked at the guide and I said, so what am I looking at? What is this, right? He said, well, this is part of the construct. And I'm like, okay. So then I was taken below the ground, and it was as if somebody had cut out the ground, and I could see right underneath where these poles come down into the ground. And in these poles, underneath them, were what some people have determined could be like looking like fiber optic cables.
Yeah.
Attached to each one of these poles. And then they're all tethered together, and then they spread out and they go up into, first of all, they go up into each individual on this planet has one of these things tethered to it from below. And then you have that same portion of it will go up and out, goes up. And that's what happened is I had to look at each of those cables individually, and they really more like a thread or a string. They were that thin to my perception. And when I looked at it really close, I could tell that each of these strands were pulsing lights going through these strands. There were pulses of light, and there was a break in between these pulses. And each one of these little strings or fibers or whatever you want to call it, the pulsing was at different rates of speed, different colors. Some of them had 2 or 3 of them running next to each other with different colors and different pulses. So as I got involved with watching the pulses, something made me jump onto this one stream in between the pulses, and it followed it and went up and out. And what happened was I came up into what I consider the laboratory. Now,
Right.
The only reason why it looked like a laboratory is because they were shown to me as beings, and I could not even begin to describe them. I've never seen beings quite like this, wearing lab coats, which was the understanding that I had, that it was a lab itself. And there was all this machinery and equipment, and then these displays like you see in the movies where they have these computer screens, but they're clear. And there,
Yeah.
these were everywhere, and there was people touching them and doing things. And then somebody was taking another thing and like pouring stuff into like these tubes that were going back down into the planet, into the people. Again, metaphoric. That's the program being dumped into each and every one of us from the laboratory, from the construct, from those that have hijacked it and controlled it, because they have no compassion, no love, no care, no feelings, no emotions to what they're doing. They're just the mad chemist.
Just like robotic.
Mad scientist. Oh, they're very physical. No, they're very physical. They're more like a Borg mentality, with their own individual personalities, if you want to call them that. They're pretty deadpan, extremely, extremely intelligent, but their ultimate mission is control. So that's part of the talking heads. And all I know is that I'm supposed to disconnect from it, and everyone is supposed to go in and disconnect from this construct. I had people asking me yesterday how to do that. I think that would probably be relegated to a whole different day and time and setting in order to assist people on an individual basis, because it is an individual basis on how you can disconnect from it. It's not as easy as people think, because it is our reality.
Well, if they are feeding us some form of control matter, then how would that account for what has often been called the Akashic record? Because there have been times where access to the Akashic record is not actively sought, but just simply happens. So if there's an interrupt that's trying to stop that, then there must be some form of a secondary conduit or something that allows that to flow in the manner it does.
Sure, absolutely. We live in duality, right? So with, what we've been speaking about, and I talked a little bit about this yesterday with the construct, is the negative aspect of it. But what's the positive aspect of it? The positive aspect of it is that which lies underneath the sheathing. It's there. It's the thing that people feel compassion, love. They get information and truth and wisdom from it. And the genetics and the contracts that people have when they come into this cycle, into this earth cycle, right? To become human in this earth cycle, they have a remembrance that some people do not have. And the remembrance is that we are more than what we think we are. We hear that crap all the time. And I call it crap because that's what some people are over there going, that's just crap. It's not crap. It's truth. We are really more than what we think we are, because our society tells us one thing, but we feel and know something entirely different. And we don't have the support mechanism yet that we should have for understanding that we really are more than what we think we are. Because we have been obscured. Our whole presence here has been obscured and has been compartmentalized against the rest of the universe, literally.
Yeah.
Right? So those that want to access the Akashic records have abilities. Again, let's talk about the fact, and I'm going to repeat this a lot over the next few months while I continue these conversations on the construct, is that the construct was never meant to last forever. It began decaying about 100 years ago at a more rapid pace. It's always been in a state of decay because it was left unattended to do its natural thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, it was usurped. But the construct itself was never meant to be a support mechanism forever. Because at some point we were supposed to be able to withstand on our own. We wouldn't be where we're at now without the intervention. So our lives would look entirely different. Whether it's good or bad doesn't matter, right? We are where we're at. So the construct in its positive energy is what feeds us as well. And people have been able to get out and pass that. So through the years, back in the 1600s, they had what they had, seers. They had people that were visionary and psychic back in the 1300s that were kept it a secret because it was considered heresy against the church and they could have died for it. I mean, it's gone on for millennia, right? Because they don't want people that know how to get outside of the construct to teach others how to do it, to become more than what they think they are.
Well, isn't there some? I feel a broader mystery there, because it's easy for a lot of people that yes, we know there's something wrong. I mean, it's just like he said in the Matrix. You felt it all your life. You know something is wrong. You just can't put your finger on it. And it's the migration towards understanding what's wrong that leads you to how to fix it. I don't think there's I mean, I don't know about you, but I didn't get a manual with this planet. So
No.
There's no clear-cut methodology for it. I think it's more individually based. And that's why it's so important, I think, that everyone has to do their own homework. I mean, you can point things out and say and concur with them, or disagree with them, or debate with them, or whatever. But I think individually, I would like to hear if you have the manual, because you and I are going to spend some more time talking.
I wish I had the manual, man. All I got was these visions and some information, and I was supposed to put it all together and make some sense out of it. I'm like, really? And I say it to him even today. I go, and what am I supposed to do with this? It doesn't have a start button here. Start here, go here, do this. There's none of that. So yeah, for sure. I'd love to have a manual. But as they're saying right now, nope, sorry, none exists. It's not our deal.
Yeah.
No. And I think you're absolutely right. It is an individual basis. And that's why I've said to people before is, even if you can do things doesn't mean you should do things, and vice versa, right? Because it really is dependent upon your own state of mind, your own belief systems, your own structures, your own internal mechanisms that you have available to you. We're all so very different, and yet being so very same. It's really quite an enigma when you look at the individual human being and where they have been and all the life cycles they've had, because it's made you the unique individual that you are, sitting here, standing there, whatever you're doing while you're listening to this. It really has made you unique. Mm-hmm. Every one of us, with all of us having different skills and capabilities, or levels, if you will, or degrees. I hate using those terms, because then that means somebody feels like they're better than or less than another, and that's not what it is. We're just in it. We're just individuals, and we must honor that process within each of us ourselves.
Well, sure. I mean, in fact, we talked a little bit about this before we got started today, in that a lot of folks have to understand that there's a lot of information flying at us at the moment. And I mean, lots of it. And we're seeing lots of different things, lots of new things, some moderately believable, some way out there that don't seem like they're even possible. And so it's up to each individual's discernment. There's not going to be one single answer to all of this, and so you can't technically dismiss everything. It's like throwing the baby out with the bathwater. So you have to literally, like you said, let it sit and stew for a little bit before, to determine whether or not that's going to fit within your realm of possibilities.
And I think you said that very, very well, Brian. There are, you told me a story today that I had never heard. Maybe you'd like to share that a little bit with everybody, because I started towards it, and then you got me off on a tangent. Shame on you. And this has to do with the process of when I was talking about the Matrix, and he come out of the little sarcophagus like thing, whatever you want to call it, when they disconnected him. And you were saying that that there was a video that you had been, and we won't leave people with a negative idea with this either. So just so you know, I won't do that.
Right,
So
right.
if you will, share with some of your research that you came up with over the past few days or weeks.
Well,
it's hard
there
to
has,
take.
I know there's a lot of very disturbing things out there, and some of it relates directly to this, or it feels like it relates directly to it. But yeah, there's some disturbing stuff out there, and I mean really, really disturbing. Um, uh, on a superficial overview of it, if you just like glance at this stuff or listen to it or watch it, it's like there's no way that could be possible because we wouldn't do that. And anytime you use that phrase in your mentality, you're wrong already. Because yes, we would do that. We have done that. Yeah, it can be done. I mean, the oldest recollection I have was a lesson I learned a long time ago as a child. If you can imagine it, it can be done. And that's always stuck with me. But yeah, there's been a lot of talk about storage of human beings. There's been tales of cloning, underground storage facilities of cloned human beings for purposes of support to the construct. And it's like all these little tidbits are coming out of the woodwork right now. And even though they're individually unique in their own separate ways, the tying factor is that if you look at it in the overall big picture, and that's where you have to go with it, the big picture, some of this stuff fits in, and it fits in quite disconcerting ways, I might say.
I think disconcerting was a gentle term compared to what you shared with me earlier today. And not to say that I mean, the horrors that we hear about every day, and a lot of them aren't even to the depths of the actual reality of them. And, you talked about the timing of it. Well, the timing of it is part of the latest book I released called The Great Revealing. Because this is what they were talking to me about, is about the truth is going to come to the surface. That which has been hidden will become known, because you can't change anything if you don't really know what's going on. You can't make a choice if you don't have the knowledge and the information to make better choices than what has been made. If you're basing your choices or your determination on what you're going to do next on the information that you have, and you don't have it all, then you're not making the best choice or decision or determination that you can. So the Great Revealing is about revealing not only famous or not known archaeological sites, but also technology, about just what you were talking about, the clone projects. By the way, I've heard of the clone projects before. I just have not heard the rest of the story that you were talking about. And I've also heard that they've taken clones from everybody that they could have a blood sample of, and they've taken it off planet even. That's another story I heard. Whether that be true or not, again, I sit here and I wait to see if there's any more pieces to the puzzle in regards to the information. Because once you get 2 or 3 pieces of information on the same thing, it's pretty hard to ignore it. It's easy to ignore an individual piece if it doesn't go with anything else. But if it starts building a wider, broader, deeper piece of information that connects to something else, even if it is obscurely, then you have to stop and look at it and go, well, maybe there is some truth to this.
Yeah.
We were talking about Area 51 and the Roswell crash. How many different stories have went on about that? How many? The thing is and there's some people out there that go, I'm so sick of hearing about it. But you know what? We've never gotten to the truth of it. So until the truth is actually known, I don't think it's something that should not be continued to be investigated and researched to see if we can't really figure out what went on there.
Well, and you've got a point there too, and I think a lot of folks have to realize that, is that in cases where there's a story that you are aware of or that you know of, and you think you know a lot about it, Um, any type of mainstream denial, debate, or rebuttal to it is just basically a measure of disinfo against it, and that's all that is. But when you start hearing multiple sources coming forward telling variant stories of it, and start sharing relational things that are equated to it, and there is no further rebuttal to that, now all of a sudden you start getting a moment, because, well, now wait a minute, if these stories were valid, then they would invalidate them, so to speak, but they're not invalidating them. So I think, once again, everybody has to discern what these stories are for. I personally am of the belief that we are also, besides seeing an incredible growth of information coming forward now, we're also starting to see an incline in the amount of crap they're throwing out, trying to thin it out, so to speak. So you have to really stand on it just a little bit more. This is why you cannot dismiss everything, and you cannot. I mean, being skeptical is one thing, but refusal to accept just simply based off of the possibility is the wrong way to go. I mean, you can be skeptical about everything there is going on out there at the moment, and yet, will that lead you to any direction of source? I don't think so, because until you realize, that's where the knowledge and the information is going to come forward. The realization is part of it. That's part of getting past all the garbage, that's the garbage in, garbage out, so to speak.
Well, and I want to bring up a point that you talked about, which is all of this information coming out is really hard anymore to really get a good handle on it, because the lines have become blurred. They've become very, very blurred. And it becomes very overwhelming for the individual. What do you believe? What don't you believe? And if you don't know, it doesn't mean to dismiss it or to own it, but what it does mean, I'm going to sit with it. I mean, that's the terms that I use. I have to sit with this for a minute. Sometimes it might take me 2 or 3 days. I don't sit and dwell on it. I just leave it sit. Literally, I just leave it sit. And if something is supposed to show up that will connect it or to disavow it, it will show up within a few days. You have to have the knowing that that's the process. That's the natural order of things. And it does work that way.
I can give you a perfect example, and I just stumbled on this a few days ago, because there's a lot more evidence of this going on right now. And everyone, every person that's even listening to this right now can attest to this. Now, in certain circles, you can sit and talk about gray aliens until the wheels come off, and they will participate and they will discuss this all day long. But the first word that you say about reptilians, and everybody bails out the window. Now, does that mean that any information that's relegated to reptilian or any subject or topic of that nature, therefore, is non-usable? I don't think so. I don't think so. And that doesn't justify the necessary information that's available on what we refer to as the grays. So it's that interesting dichotomy between the two topics. You know, they're willing to buy the whole gray story now, but reptiles, not so much. And it's like, it's all in the same story, folks. And until you start grasping these portions of these stories and piecing them together, there is no one story that's going to supersede all the others. They're all connected in one way or another. And even what we're talking about today about the construct, relating to how this affects a lot of things.
Everything.
Everything. You will see evidence now that you become aware of this topic, or have heard of it before, and now this is more of it, whichever the case may be. Now you're going to start hearing bits and pieces dropping all over the place about this. That's how it works. So again, you can't really dismiss everything just out of hand and say, well, I believe this, but I don't believe that. Um, if you're operating from that kind of a position where you will accept one thing but not accept another, then you basically don't accept anything, and that's just my opinion. Sorry.
No, don't ever apologize for your opinion, Brian. Your opinion is important, and it is what it is. And I think people just need to understand that they can either agree or disagree with anything that you and I have said here today.
Oh,
But
sure.
the one thing I do ask is everyone just sit with the information, sit with your information, sit with my information, and let's see where it takes us, right? So that being said, we're out of time here. So I know that you have done a little work, so I want you to tell people where they might find some more of your Book of Man. No, not. Okay, so I will tell you though, up on my website from our first show that we did, I have left the links up for everyone. They are on my site. They are going to stay on my site so that people want to go and discover the Book of Man, what you have done. I think I've moved it to the extras page, and it's also on the broadcast page at the very bottom. So all the links are still there. I just thought the information, Brian, was too valuable for it to not be kept up. So I'm going to plug you there for that because I think it's deserved. Okay?
Well, I appreciate that.
Yeah. And listen, Mr. Producer and guest, thank you so much. I mean, this has really been a great conversation. Thank you so much for joining me today. And tomorrow night, my guest again is going to be Harvey Kraft, the Buddha of Babylon, from Babylon, the Buddha from Babylon. And so he will be joining us tomorrow night from 7 to 9 p.m. So until we meet again, where will your life's journey lead you? Many blessings, everyone, and goodbye.